Hello YouTube, my name is Alex, and today I want to talk to you about one of the most misunderstood and greatest men in all of science. And he is not very well known. His name is Thomas Townsend Brown, and he invented a practical way to understand the link between electricity and gravitation. And the apparatus he produced, of course he produced many apparatus over his lifetime, but the one I'd like to talk about today is his electrogravitic thrust-producing apparatus. And that's just a fancy way of saying it turns electricity into force. And it does so without the use of ions. Now, if you look up Thomas Townsend Brown, the Byfield-Brown effect, or ionic craft, you basically see an asymmetrical capacitor, which uses balsa wood and styrofoam and often aluminum foil in the creation of electric wind, which is a fully ion-driven force. And his force was trying to isolate the gravity component and eliminate the ion component of the force production, which is what makes his work really unique, and there's just not any information out there, hardly, on this subject. You can find information in his 3 published laboratory notebooks available on rexresearch.com. which is where I found the information I used to produce this. And I made a video about this a few months back. This is an electrogravitic thrust-producing apparatus. Sorry, one of the electrodes was backwards. It has 3 elements. Unlike a normal capacitor, which is only made of 2, he found that the asymmetry of 3 electrodes actually aided in the process of producing this effect. And in my further videos, where I'll talk about Wilhelm Reich and others, we'll find that this is a recurring theme. Using capacitors, using high voltage, and using 3 elements is a recurring theme in a lot of people's work who were exploring alternative energy systems, subtle energy, etc. So getting back to his apparatus, it's produced in 3 parts. We have the innermost electrode, which is spherical. We have the middle electrode, which is porous, and we have the upper electrode, which just has a large surface area and is a canopy shape. Now, the middle electrode is also a canopy shape. The reason it's porous is because we want to aid in the production of a corona from this middle electrode. And I know that sounds suspiciously like an ionic craft, because a corona basically means the production of copious amounts of ions around this central electrode. But it was found that these thin wire electrodes in the center worked even in vacuum, in fact better in vacuum, and worked when they were completely encapsulated in dielectrics. So the whole point of his research was to find that link between gravity and electricity, and using an apparatus very similar to this, he was able to do that. When I tested this apparatus, I used various different power sources, and I was only able to get force production using an electrostatic power source, which is a very interesting phenomenon because I used AC, DC from a variety of sources, very high voltage, and in a very similar setup to when I used the Wimshurst generator, but only the Wimshurst electrostatic machines seem to produce this effect for me. And I wanted to produce a video basically talking about this guy, his life, and how misunderstood he was. So in college, he had a professor called Dr. Byfield who suggested to him that a capacitor was the ultimate way to interrelate gravity and electricity, and he pursued this for the rest of his life. He joined the Navy when he was pretty young and donated his entire electrogravitic laboratory to the U.S. Navy at the same time. Once the Navy really got a good look at what he was doing in this laboratory, they pulled him out of the typical Navy duties. He was stationed on a submarine, if I'm not mistaken, and they put him to work in the black projects, from what information is available, in order to further his research on this topic. This is one of the reasons it's extremely difficult to replicate his work, because he had very, very good funding and a lot of time and experts around him to help him produce these effects to isolate the ideal power sources, circuitry, etc. And this stuff does not find its way into most of his laboratory notebooks. But we do know from his laboratory notebooks, we have a general idea of where his head was at, and he produced some absolutely incredible things. In a previous video, I also talked about how he produced electricity from rocks, and I have a circuit diagram here which shows how he created a high voltage bias across rocks and barium titanate capacitors in order to get readings out of the rocks themselves to see what was going on in the gravity wave field. He discovered that gravity was actually being transmitted in waves, and it fluctuated diurnally, meaning that during the daytime it had a jump, and during nighttime it decreased these gravity wave intensities. And there's actually a graph you can see here where he used barium titanate and granite to map out the self-potential, it's called, of these different materials, and thereby he was able to map out the gravity wave phenomena. Not too long ago, Nobel Prize was given to 3 gentlemen who claimed to have discovered the gravity wave, but Thomas Townsend Brown was doing this over 50 years ago. So he was a pioneer and an amazing man. And although my electrogravitic thrust-producing apparatus is not producing enough thrust to move the whole apparatus as a whole, it is producing enough movement to continue my research in this field. And like I said, it is a very difficult and expensive thing to research, so progress is slow. But I wanted to talk a little bit about his work into electrohydrodynamics as well. So electrohydrodynamics is the movement of fluid or other material using electricity, and this is directly related to his work with electrogravitics. And one of the apparatus which he produced for this purpose was shown here. This is on the Thomas Townsend Brown family website library, and he biased 2 rotating members, one with high voltage positive, the other with negative, and he was able to increase the flow drastically of air coming from between these 2. And the reason this is related to his electrogravitic thrust is not because of the ion wind phenomenon, as many think, but actually it's related to the divergence and convergence of electrostatic fields. That is actually what this design is based to do. It creates a divergence towards one electrode, a convergence towards the other of the electrostatic field, and forms the electrostatic field in a more or less hyperbolic manner, which when you do that, because that's not typically done in nature, it creates unstable forces, and gravity, it was found to be related to that phenomenon itself. And so I just wanted to produce this video and briefly talk about his work, explain my apparatus from my other video on my channel, and I really suggest you look into him further, read his laboratory notebooks, and this guy was really incredible. So thank you for your time, and go ahead and like, subscribe, and comment below.